Started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rachel, and I am the M Family Program Manager, which means I manage parent and family engagement at the University of Michigan. We are thrilled to have you here tonight to talk about financial aid. I am here with two of my colleagues from the Dean of Students Office and the Office of Financial Aid. Before we get started, I just wanted to run down a couple of housekeeping items. One is that we ask that you put all questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen or top as you may have it. And we will compile questions throughout the session that will be answered at the end of the conversation. So we will compile all of the questions. Anything that we don't answer tonight due to time constraints, we will answer via email. We will send you all an email after the session within the next few days with all of the answers to all of your questions. So again, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen, as it may be. And now I will allow my colleagues to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Nicole.
Thank you, Rachel. Good evening, everyone. I'm Nicole Banks. I'm one of the Associate Deans of Students in the Dean of Students Office, and I oversee our parent and family engagement strategies. So I get to partner with Rachel on all of our programming, and am so grateful to have this opportunity to be with you all again tonight. I'll turn it over to you, Chrissy.
Thanks, Nicole. I am Chrissy Bomick. I'm the Senior Associate Director in the Financial Aid Office, and I'm thrilled to get the chance to speak with everyone today. Rachel, do we want me to jump in or what's our
Go
plan?
ahead and jump in, Chrissy. Thank you.
Okay. In that case, I'm going to share my screen so that we can have a little bit of guidance as we go through this topic. I know that there are a lot of questions around financial aid eligibility, scholarships, grants, all these different things. One thing I want to preface this with is that financial aid is very specific to institution. And so what University of Michigan may be doing is not necessarily how other institutions approach financial aid. The other thing I will say is that financial aid regulations and laws are changing at a more rapid pace right now than pretty much any time in history. So everything is subject to change pretty much from what I'm going to cover, but at least based on about 20 minutes ago when I last checked things, everything I'm going to talk about tonight is accurate as we can be. But definitely utilize the Q&A if you have questions, and we can more specifically dive into any topic that you're interested in. So with all of that stuff being said, my plan for tonight is to really go over what is financial aid at a high level, talk about educational cost, the application process, the different types of funding available, and then think about, make sure you know about financial education initiatives here at U of M, and a few tips and ideas that we've identified over the years. Now, from a basic perspective, financial aid is very simply any money used to pay for school. Sometimes I hear families talk about quote unquote financial aid as loans or as the FAFSA. Really, it captures a lot of different types of funding, both gift funding and self-help funding. Gift funding being scholarships and grants, things that are not repaid, and self-help funding are things like employment, federal work study, and student loans. Because all of that fits into the category of money for school, it's really important to think about this category of financial aid resource broadly so that you're able to leverage and access as much resources that are available to your family. I'm going to approach kind of talking about financial aid from these 3 points: cost of attendance, application, and funding. And I'm going to drill into each of these much more closely because they all are an important aspect of how we get from thinking about funding school to the reality of funding school. First and foremost, educational cost. Federal student aid talks about this as a cost of attendance. The cost of attendance is in many ways legislated. It is in the Higher Education Act as amended, and it's referring to what an average student in a program with a modest lifestyle could expect to incur cost-wise for their educational enrollment. Uh, Offices, aid offices, institutions try to identify cost of attendance for all of their students. It is required in some ways to look at components like tuition and fees, books, supplies, course materials, equipment. We also are required to look at living expenses. Sometimes people refer to that as room and board, but broadly living expenses. And we look at personal and miscellaneous costs. But there are some other components that on occasion come up and we can look at. For example, we look at a transportation allowance, but maybe an individual student has unique needs, like a sudden need to return home kind of outside of the standard cycle. That cost incurred may be something additional that we can factor into their needs for assistance. Adjustments are possible to the cost of attendance, whether it's someone whose rent is higher than we estimate, or whether it is something unique like a medical expense that is really impacting your family's ability to pay. These things we can look at, but they're not part of the standard. When we think about what those standard costs are, how we capture that cost of attendance, we're really looking at two types of costs. We're looking at direct costs and indirect costs. Now, admissions offices, many of the recruitment units are going to be focused on what is your bill to U of M, and there's a really important need to focus on that so you understand what that cost obligation is. That bill is what we call a direct cost. These are things paid directly to the institution, tuition and fees, housing and food if the student's living in dorms. These are things we can see on the university bill. But financial aid, we understand that it costs more than that to survive as a student for the academic year. And so we're also factoring in indirect costs. These could be paid to others. They can be more, they can be less, depending on lifestyle choices, availability, all different types of decisions an individual student and family may make. In the indirect category, you can think about things like books. U of M, you can buy books anywhere that you decide to buy them. That's an indirect cost because you're not paying the institution for the books, you're paying a private company for those books. Miscellaneous personal expenses, think about things like deodorant and shampoo and toothpaste. Those are what we talk about when we talk about miscellaneous expenses. And then transportation are those nominal kind of average costs, whether it's getting from campus to a part-time job and back, whether it's getting from class to an off-campus apartment. That's what we're trying to capture when we look at transportation allowance. When I talk to families about thinking about costs, I really want you to think broadly about what it does cost to survive. And that's really what we're trying to capture when we look at eligibility for financial aid. It's not just the bill, it's more broadly thinking about expense. To give you a reference point, our cost of attendance here for this academic year is on the screen, and I've got it broken down into our standard cost of attendance categories. And you can see that the main difference between the expenses is really in tuition and fees. All of our other categories of expense are identical, whether students living in dorms or off campus, whether they're in state or out of state. We have estimates for all of these different categories, and the real main difference between in-state and out of state are those tuition and fees. Our Board of Regents meets each summer to establish the rates for the next academic year. When we get those established rates, financial aid is going back through financial aid eligibility, recalculating those costs and reassessing eligibility for all of our students. So it's not uncommon to have our students receive revised financial aid awards later in the summer once we have those final costs established. Up until we get those costs, up until midsummer, we're many times using current year expenses to try to approximate what cost is going to look like for the upcoming year. You can do some estimates on expenses if you need to or if you want to. All institutions are required to publish a net price calculator. We are not different in that. We utilize one through the College Board, and I've got the link up here as well as a QR code to get to it directly. The net price calculator is really looking at in an interactive way, what is your family circumstance to try to estimate your contribution and your needs when it comes to expenses. We try to estimate what aid eligibility is going to look like, both in institutional funding like grants and scholarships, but also federal funding. So the net price calculator, if you have not received a financial aid notice yet, is a wonderful tool to try to approximate what eligibility may look like. On the federal aid side, there is also early estimators that you can utilize to calculate kind of what the FAFSA looks like for your aid eligibility. And I'll talk about what the FAFSA is in a moment when I talk about applying for aid. And that moment's here. Applying for aid. The University of Michigan uses 2 applications for our undergraduate first-time entering students. Every student, undergraduate, graduate, professional, entering, continuing, we ask to complete the FAFSA each year. FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It's completed at fafsa.gov. It's completed online. I want to emphasize that it is free. It's the first word in the name. It's the first F in the acronym FAFSA. I emphasize that it's free because it's not uncommon for us to see people offering the service of completing it for a family on their behalf. Sometimes we see tax accountants offering to do this. Sometimes we see individual consultants offering to do this at a fee. Some of those fees I've seen as high as $120 to complete a free application for federal student aid. I bring that up to emphasize that FAFSA is an annual process. We don't want anyone paying a fee to submit a free federal application any year, let alone every year. So if you do need assistance completing the FAFSA, if you have questions, if you're struggling, please reach out to our aid office. We will walk you through whatever the issue is and help you navigate completing it so that you're not having to incur a cost related to the FAFSA. The FAFSA is a single application used nationally for federal aid. So you're just completing one, whatever school the student is going to. It is specific to the student. So if you have multiple students in college, each student has a FAFSA attached to them. And states use the FAFSA for state funding, federal funding, obviously, and many private organizations and foundations will ask for the FAFSA to be completed for scholarship opportunities. Since it is free, we encourage families to do it every year to see what eligibility is, even if you decide at the end of the day you will decline a loan, for example. At least submitting it positions us to offer as much support as we can, and if a special circumstance arises, react quickly. For entering year undergraduate students, we also ask that the CSS profile be completed. Now, the FAFSA is used for federal aid, for state aid. The CSS profile is used for University of Michigan money. And many private institutions use this. More public institutions are moving towards using the CSS profile. We've used it for many years. It just gives the University of Michigan more information on the complexities of your financial circumstance, both income, but also debt and special circumstances, to help us better assess how we can help and what your family's financial need is. The CSS profile isn't free. It does have an application fee, $25, but they have generous fee waiver programs depending on your circumstances. Just like the College Board offers waivers for standardized testing, it's the same with the CSS profile. And if it's financially challenging for you, hopefully you're going to qualify for that fee waiver. We encourage families to really pay attention when they're completing their aid applications because errors can cause delays in eligibility. And the single biggest error in the last couple of years since the FAFSA was redesigned is really related to putting University of Michigan's school code on the application. When you search for University of Michigan on your FAFSA, you're probably getting somewhere between 5 and 7 listed schools there. What you don't see is the full names, and that makes it challenging. So one may be University of Mi, and one may be U of Michigan, and one may be Univ, some variation. One of them's attached to the law school. One of them's attached to the medical school. One of them's attached to Flint. One of them's attached to Dearborn. One of them's attached to Ann Arbor. We know that it is very challenging to pick the right school, especially if this is your first time completing the application. So I want to emphasize using the right school code. On the FAFSA, I have it listed here. On the CSS profile, I have it listed. Getting that application to us, getting those applications to us really allows us to get information back to you as soon as possible. Before the school code became an issue, the biggest error we saw was Social Security numbers. The financial aid office is really equipped to help families navigate just about any error possible on the FAFSA and CSS profile. The one we can't help with is Social Security number. So when you're initially completing those applications, please, please, please make sure you are using the student's correct Social Security number as a start. Um, Similarly, questions about who is the parent of the household or the parent of record when we're talking about completing the FAFSA. Really look at that information to make sure you're reporting on the parent that you're directed to report on. If your family is separated or if there's a divorce, the FAFSA has, I think they call it a parent wizard to ask questions about your circumstance to help you determine whose information should be contributed to the FAFSA. On the CSS profile side, we ask for both parents, even in cases of divorce or separation. Both the custodial parent and the non-custodial parent, or what the profile calls the household A and household B. So both parents contribute for that application. Sometimes we get confusion around income. This happens less now with the FAFSA pulling information from the IRS directly, but it's always good to pay attention and make sure the student's income is being reported as student income and that you're not inadvertently putting parent income in the student field. Those are errors that we sometimes see. And also around investments, please note that it's asking really about net worth. So you're reporting what the net worth is of any real estate investments, excluding the primary residence. That's also an error we sometimes see. So all of that FAFSA information and all of the cost information is coming together to calculate financial need. Financial need really drives eligibility for individual financial aid programs, and it's a math equation. It's really straightforward, and I have it here for you so that you can kind of understand how it works. We're starting with that cost of attendance, those educational costs I mentioned. We move into what the FAFSA and on the profile side, the profile are really calculating as the family's contribution, the eligibility indicator, what's now called the student aid index on the FAFSA. Also subtracted out of there is any other private scholarships or other resources. And the bottom line is what's considered the student's financial need. So cost of attendance minus student aid index equals financial need. From there, the best way I can describe financial need is to think about it as a pie. I've tried other ways to do this. I always end up back with the pie. I'm still hungry for pie after talking about this, but it's still the best way I can talk about it, at least as far as I've found. Think of need as a pie. The whole pie is that need calculation. All of the different aid awards must fit in that pie. You can never have more than a full pie. So the slices, the size of the slices will vary based on scholarships, grants, maybe federal work study, programs like that. But we all have to fit within that single pie. Outside of the pie, the fork in this metaphor, is the family contribution, that student aid index. That is always outside of the pie. That's completely separate from that pie and can never be part of that pie. So I want to emphasize that that student aid index is hanging out there. This becomes really important when a student has a financial aid notice that's covering their full financial need. Maybe they have Go Blue Guarantee and they have University of Michigan grant and they have federal work study. So need is being covered. And then a new private scholarship is received or reported to financial aid. And suddenly we have an extra piece of the pie. Financial aid has to adjust those other pieces to make sure everything fits. And so that's when we see revisions to financial aid awards that may reduce loans, for example, or reduce federal work study, for example, or in some cases replace other types of need-based grants, depending on the amount of the scholarship. But really, that need is a finite number, and so everything has to fit in there, and the sizes of the different pieces can vary, but we're still working with that single number. And that student aid index is outside. That's moving us to funding, what those individual pieces are. I think of funding in three ways: free money, earned money, and borrowed money. Scholarships and grants are a free money piece. Really, the only difference between these two is the name. I guess arguably, scholarships in many ways have an earned component attached, a merit component, whether that's academics or a winning essay or an art portfolio or a woman of a certain height, and the scholarship is for someone who's above a certain height or someone with red, whatever the merit component is, scholarships tend to have that feature. Grants tend to be really focused on financial need, although both of these programs can have multiple factors involved. So whether it's called a scholarship, whether it's called a grant, whether it's called a fellowship, whether it's called whatever it's called, just know that that fits into the free money category. This is being given without any expectation of interest, repayment, anything along those lines. Scholarships and grants have terms and conditions. So if something is awarded, a student really needs to be aware of what those terms and conditions are so that they understand their eligibility for renewal. Is the scholarship for 1 year only? If it's renewable, does it require full-time enrollment? These are really important criteria to understand so that you can maximize eligibility. And when they're awarded, you're going to get information about those terms and conditions. The second category is earned money. Federal Work Study is the program most often talked about. Federal Work Study, though, is just a student's opportunity to get a job on campus. It's a part-time job. Federal Work Study has some of those part-time wages being paid through this program. So the employer pays a share, the Federal Work Study pays a share, but the student is just experiencing it as a part-time job. They're working hours, they're earning their paycheck biweekly, they're using that paycheck for personal miscellaneous expenses, maybe transportation, those indirect costs. The free money will go towards direct expenses first. It's going to go towards tuition and fees, the student bill first. Work study, student employment, that's different. Because a student earns that, they're only receiving it in their paycheck. It's not helping to pay down the bill due. So if a work study has been awarded, that's not money you should be subtracting from estimated tuition costs. It's money the student may have available if they get a job and they work that job to help with those miscellaneous indirect expenses. So it does operate a little bit differently. And then finally, we have borrowed money, loans. There are student loans, there are parent loans, there are private loans. They come in many different varieties. For undergraduate students, there are subsidized loans in some cases if there's financial need, if there's room in the pie to fit them. Subsidized loans don't accrue interest while the student's in school. Unsubsidized loans are also available to students. Unsubsidized loans do not require need. Those can help with that student aid index or any other costs that aren't already being covered. And then on the parent side and the private side, if you find that you still need help with expenses, these loan programs offer some supplemental borrowing options. Supplemental, but also credit-based. So it's, if you go that route, just know there's additional application steps involved. I've put the link up here to our website where we talk about types of financial aid so that you can get a little bit more information about what these programs are, terms and conditions, what you should be aware of. We like to talk about free money. We want you to maximize free money. So I put some scholarship tips up here. I mentioned this as I was talking about it, but I want to emphasize again, understand those terms and conditions. Is the scholarship one time? Is it renewable? Many of our renewable 4-year awards require full-time enrollment. Some have special GPA requirements, especially from private foundations, from schools, colleges on campus. Know what those requirements are. Also understand if it's tuition specific. Is it an award that can only be used for tuition, or can it be used for some of those other educational expenses? For example, there are tuition promise scholarships like the Kalamazoo Promise, I think of as just one example. That's specifically for tuition and can only pay tuition. If a student has that and another scholarship that is specifically for tuition and can only pay tuition, tuition can only be paid once. So you can only utilize up to 100% of tuition. This sometimes requires some coordination of scholarships, some adjustments of eligibility because you need to make sure that you're covering the expenses no more than full. Also, don't stop searching for scholarships. We see students coming into undergrad with a lot of energy and momentum in looking for new scholarship opportunities. And then as they get into their program, we see energy kind of go down in finding new awards. I just want to encourage you to continue to look for these opportunities. There are a lot of returning student awards, both at the school and college level, but also at the Office of Financial Aid. Our website lists a number of scholarships that have applications attached. There are also scholarships at units around campus that a student may apply for. It just takes some energy and some dedication to continue to look for these after the first year. And finally, please, please, please be cautious of scams. Scams are getting more sophisticated. They know the academic timelines. They tend to target students at times where bills are being sent out and where urgency can create action that you're not necessarily thinking through. Sometimes it looks like a message is coming from the school, the college, the financial aid office. If they're asking for information from you by email, if they're asking for fees to apply for free money, honestly, if they're coming to you offering money, have some questions there. It's not often in life that people just randomly find us and say, here, let me give you several hundred, several $1,000s. So if they're presenting it that clearly to you, maybe have some of your alerts up and ask some more questions. I listed here the resource site on studentaid.gov where they kind of keep a list of known scams out there, and general kind of buyer beware rules save a lot of families from being caught up in these, but it's also a really good resource just to know what's out there. Sometimes I get questions about what happens when my student moves off campus. This is especially for maybe transfer students or students in years 2, 3, wherever. From a financial aid perspective, we know they incur living costs regardless of who they're paying. So we don't approach a student any differently or a student's eligibility any differently, whether they're living on campus or off campus. We know they have those expenses. And so a student living on campus and off campus would see an identical financial aid award. The only difference is who they're paying that to. If the costs are directly billed by U of M, financial aid is going to go pay those first. And if there's any excess aid after those costs are paid, then the student gets that as a refund for books and personal expenses. If a student isn't being billed by U of M for dorm expenses, and instead they have a private landlord who they're paying privately for costs, well, when financial aid pays, it's going to go towards tuition and fees. Once that's covered, then excess money is going to refund to the student, and it's up to the student to manage their monthly obligations with those private landlords and off-campus costs. So in terms of estimating what's available to live off campus, you can really utilize current financial aid notices to approximate what that eligibility would be, and just think about, what's tuition, and then how much would be left over, if any, to help with living expenses, or how much more do I need to borrow to help with living expenses? Those are the types of considerations. I've listed here some resources. We have an off-campus student worksheet. It's really just a budget sheet to help students think through what are their obligations kind of outside of a tuition bill and to plan for those. One thing I want to emphasize is that we have leases, landlords who are looking at 12-month leases, but we have financial aid that's looking at the academic year, so only the 8 to 9 months of the academic year. If a student is doing a 12-month lease, they need to be thinking proactively about how they're going to cover those rent obligations for those months outside of the academic year, because many times that has to be covered through part-time work over the summer or other resources. And then I talked about refunds. One thing I will say with refunds is that we issue those at the beginning of each term. So if there's excess money after the direct costs are paid, those refunds are sent out, but it does tend to be at the beginning of the term, which requires students, families to think about budgeting and how that's utilized until the next refund timeframe comes up. For fall, we tend to issue those late August, just based on when the term starts. For winter term, those are late December, early January. I think they came out January 4th this year, based on when we could pay financial aid. So kind of planning ahead for how those refunds can be used over the course of that academic period. Because it's not intuitive on how to budget money, I do want to emphasize that students aren't alone in this. Families aren't alone in this. Office of Financial Aid, we have a pretty robust program around financial education. It has grown significantly over the last 2 years, is continuing to grow. And we have academic courses and non-academic courses. We have an online course, First Steps in Education. It's part of the first year Student Success Collection with Michigan Online. Encourage all incoming students to participate in that. It's not credit bearing, but it does provide some great resources and skill activities to familiarize students with how to manage money as a college student. On the academic side of the house, for our undergrads, we have really 3 course offerings. It's a series: Financially Savvy from the Start, Financially Savvy Student, and Financially Savvy for the Future. So students can establish, develop, and build personal finance skills throughout their time at U of M. And for students who just can't work into their schedules, this extra academic and require or extra academic work, we also have available an online self-paced module-based platform for students, cashcourse.org. So students can access that with their UMich email, the access ID I have here, and they can play around with the different information modules. There's one on budgeting, there's one on credit, really at their own pace, based on their own interests and their own needs. And then finally, in some very limited capacities, we do individual student meetings. I want to emphasize that we don't have financial planners or financial counselors on staff. We're really focused on educating students. So we're not going to talk about what a budget will look like or walk a student through that budget, but we will educate them on what are some models they could consider using. Why is it important to budget? How can they think about planning and approaching using refunds over an extended period? Those types of meetings we have available for students to do as well. Some did you knows, the FAFSA and the CSS profile really are looking at information that's a couple years old. Lots can change from when the 2024 taxes were filed and when 26-27 comes around. Financial aid doesn't know about those changes and can't help you adapt to those changes if you don't report it to us. So if you've had financial hardships, if you've had incurred special circumstances, please report those to financial aid so that we can see if there's any eligibility revisions we can make. We'll look at what's going on, see if there's anything else we can do. Another really important point that kind of underlies all financial aid is that enrollment always, always, always impacts financial aid eligibility. Financial aid is offered assuming a student is enrolling full time. It's at least 12 credits, and that is where all financial aid is kind of level set. If a student enrolls in less than 12 credits, their financial aid will be impacted. And they're only eligible for a portion of federal loans, a portion of federal grants, a portion of institutional grants. And with some scholarships that require full-time enrollment, they could lose that scholarship for the term, or depending on the terms and conditions, they could lose that scholarship forever. So it's really important if a student is thinking about enrollment that's anything other than full-time for the entire term, whether it's part-time or dropping some courses or fully withdrawing, it's important that they talk to financial aid and understand how those changes will impact financial aid eligibility. And finally, I want to emphasize that participation in coursework is key to retaining financial aid. Just like enrollment impacts financial aid, enrollment is more than just registration on paper. Students have to be actively engaged in courses to retain the aid that they've been offered. Student can have 15 credits, but if they never attend one of those courses, they really haven't earned that aid. And when the instructor reports no participation, financial aid goes back through and we have to cancel aid for that course. We have to adjust things even retroactively. So we always encourage students to actively participate throughout their enrollment in the term so that they can really document that they're not just doing well academically, but they can retain the aid that they've been offered. A few more did you knows. Students are, their information, especially their financial aid information, is under a number of different federal privacy rules, and we take that privacy very seriously. We will not speak to anyone other than the student about financial aid unless the student has explicitly consented to us talking to you. So if you're a family member, if you're another trusted person in that student's life, and that student wants you to be able to discuss their financial aid, their needs, their student bill, they must log into Wolverine Access and authorize you. And if that's not done, we will not be able to speak with you. So it's really important that parent-family authorization is done if you want to have that discussion have any discussions with our office or the billing office, Student Financial Services. Emergencies come up, and the University of Michigan has a number of different emergency funding opportunities. And these really are for emergent situations, things that aren't planned. We always want families to talk to financial aid so that we're not just looking at Band-Aid solutions, for lack of a better way to describe that, but we're looking at more long-term solutions. But if something urgent, immediate, critical comes up, there are emergency programs through many of the schools and colleges, through CEW Plus, through the Dean of Students office, through us. So depending on what the need is, there are opportunities in different pockets on campus to get some immediate need funding. If the need is immediate, but not necessarily grant based. Every student who's enrolled at U of M during their enrollment has access to kind of a short-term university loan in Wolverine Access. As long as they're in good standing with the university, a short-term loan has about a 1 to 2 day turnaround time. And these are really things that could help if an emergency ticket home is needed or if an emergency car repair comes up, and they'll be able to pay it. They just don't have the money right now. Short-term loans are 90-day loans. There's zero interest as long as they're repaid within 90 days. So I'd just like to mention that resource is out there if a student needs it. And for our international families and our international students, there's really very limited access to financial assistance for our international students studying on visas, F1s, J1s. The International Center has great guidance on emergency funding and really just general funding available. But because international students, F1, J1 students, don't qualify for federal student aid, the Office of Financial Aid doesn't have resources available that we can provide. We're really driven by federal aid eligibility, that FAFSA application, and for our visa students, that's not something that we're going to be able to help with. So I always refer those students to the International Center. If we have Michigan resident students who are ineligible to complete the FAFSA, but aren't studying on a visa because of a number of different kind of immigration situations, those are things that they can talk to us on a one-on-one basis, and we can determine what eligibility looks like in that case. So FAFSA students, US citizens, permanent residents, that's pretty straightforward. International students studying on visas, pretty straightforward. If we've got a Michigan resident who doesn't fall into those categories, they need to speak with us and we can talk about what their eligibility may look like. That was a huge information dump, and I apologize for speaking so quickly, but I wanted to make sure I got through that. I'm going to stop with kind of the contact information up here. Our live chat is open Monday through Friday from 10 to 4. Our email's on there, our phone number's on there. We do have aid administrators responding to all contacts, fully trained aid administrators. So when you reach out, just know that you can have confidence in the information that you're getting. But with that, what questions do we have to fire at me, Nicole?
Thank you so much, Chrissy. You really provided a lot of great detail, and I can tell that much of what you were talking about is what parents showed up tonight hoping to ask about. So there's some similarity in the questions of things that you eventually covered. So forgive me, my Shih Tzu is in the background making noise, Shih Poo. That being said, there are a couple questions that I think it may just warrant touching back on what you ultimately shared. And feel free to bring your slides back if you'd like to cover some of the detail. And some questions may still come in, but I'll start with this first one. When a change in job situation for one of a dependent student's parents warrants a review, would a change in job situation for one of the student's parents warrant a review of the financial aid package for that student?
Yes, that's an easy one to answer. Anytime a family is experiencing what I would think of as a hardship change in their financial circumstances, whether it's a reduction of income, a loss of income, a death of a parent, and the loss comes from that. These are really important things to connect with the aid office about. We want to make sure we are offering aid as accurately as possible to your family's current needs and current eligibility. Not all circumstances can be accounted for and allowances can be made. But if we're talking about job loss, that is something we absolutely want to dig into and see how that may impact both federal and institutional aid eligibility. Couple of kind of fine line details there is that the job loss has to be more than just temporary. So what we tend to say is after about 10 weeks, if you still haven't obtained new employment, if things haven't gotten better, that's the point that we can start to work with you to review eligibility. So like 10 weeks, 12 weeks, that's the point that you would reach out to us to talk through what the change is. We then have a process that we go through to collect information from the family. We're looking for kind of current year, recent year income tax information. We ask for a personal statement, supporting documentation such as a severance letter, something along those lines. We will work with your family on what aid office needs to collect to reassess eligibility. But that is absolutely something that we can look at with your family.
Thank you so much. And the person who asked the question submitted it based on a first-year student, but I just asked it generally because I believe the answer was general to any level, any enrollment type.
Absolutely.
Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
For our first year students, we are really early in the process. And so those reviews may take us, into March, April to try to get additional information to you. So the sooner you reach out to us, the better. But the process, the encouragement to reach out, that is absolutely true, Nicole, whether it's year one or whether it's final semester of final year, we can work with you based on changing needs.
Thank you so much. Since you mentioned in your answer just now, you mentioned being kind of early in the process, I want to move to the next question that is really has to do with early decision, that new program at Michigan for admissions. So if a student is admitted early and they make the decision early, we know the timeline in there includes applying for financial aid. And there's a window of November, December for hearing back from financial aid. Is there an opportunity for aid to be adjusted later in the timeline before the student enrolls that coming fall or whenever that student is enrolling? Is that going to be a natural thing people should anticipate, or should they expect that the award during the early decision phase is final?
No, that's a great question. The key with financial aid uh, offers is number one, the applications were submitted before their deadline. So as long as we have both the FAFSA and the CSS profile application submitted before the financial aid deadline for early decision, uh, that establishes kind of baseline eligibility. And that allows us to provide the financial aid offer quickly after enroll or admission decisions go out. We've been providing aid offers since the week before Christmas this year and are continuing to do that as we get information completed. Because our costs and our financial aid is really based on 25-26 data, cost of attendance, funding levels, it is something to expect a revision around when we get updated tuition numbers and updated funding numbers in the summer. So all of our students who have applied for financial aid will get a revision of eligibility just based on cost changing and finalized funding midsummer, usually by the end of July is what we say. And that's a revision to expect. But between that timeline, other things can generate revisions. Maybe the school or college offers a scholarship. If the student's admitted into LSA, maybe LSA scholarships offers them something. That's going to push things through reassessment and could result in a revised financial aid award. Maybe a private scholarship is reported. That pushes things in. So revisions can happen along the way as new information becomes available. Maybe there's a special circumstance like loss of income, and we reevaluate based on that. But unless new information becomes available, the two touchstones are really that initial aid offer, and then once we get finalized rates for the upcoming year in summer. But we can see changes whenever new information comes in.
Thank you very much. You showed a great detailed slide that covered cost of attendance. So I had tuition and fees for both in-state and out-of-state students. One person submitted a question to know if the dollar amount for tuition that I recall seeing as in-state, $18,300 plus dollars, whether or not that was for the year or for a semester. And then the second part of the question is whether or not there's a different rate for tuition for upper class students. Can you talk about our tuition and fees for underclassmen and upperclassmen and
Yeah,
in-state and out-of-state again?
I'm trying to find that slide. Oh, here it is.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So this is looking at the full academic year, which University of Michigan defines as fall and winter. So late August through the end of April, generally speaking. So these costs are really looking at two terms. They'd be divided equally between those terms. This is the standard based on an incoming first, second year LSA student at College of Literature, Science, and the Arts, who's enrolling full time in that 12 to 18 credit bracket. There are a lot of different tuition rates at this institution. Like many schools, there is a tuition difference between lower division and upper division, and you can think of them kind of generally as first year sophomore, junior plus. The rate is higher in those later years for many different reasons, but the rate is higher. These costs are not reflecting that higher rate. These costs are reflecting kind of the entry level basic rate. Also, there could be differences based on the school or college. So this is LSA, but engineering and some of the other schools and colleges have different fee structures and or different rates that could very likely be higher. The student's financial aid offer is going to pull information specific to their program of study. So if the student is a junior in the School of Music, Theater, and Dance, they're not going to see a cost of attendance tuition number of 18,346. They're going to see the number that's specific to their program, their residency, and their enrollment level. So that will vary. The best place that I can recommend families go to is the registrar's website to look at tuition and fees. They've got a really great tool that calculates out what it would be. So ro.umich.edu, tuition and fees are one of the options on there. You can look at kind of by program what those rates are, lower division, upper division, at what credit level that changes. They're where I go to look at these rates. There are also different structures in spring and summer that May through August period of time. And so it's also a great place to look at what those rates are.
Thank you very much. Got a couple more questions for you. Okay. So if a parent was denied a private loan for their student and the student still has a need, unmet need, still has a need for funding, are there any other options for that student and their family?
The options are extremely limited when a private lender is not approving supplemental borrowing for the family. We first encourage families to see if they qualify for a Federal Plus loan, and that's a parent loan. The difference between Plus loan credit checks and private loan credit checks is pretty significant. Private lenders are really looking at credit worthiness. They're looking at approvals based on risk, based on credit score, based on income to debt, those types of worthiness features. The Parent Plus loan credit process is just looking to make sure there's no negative credit or adverse credit. So as long as there's no bankruptcy recently, no delinquency or default of over 120 days, as long as there's nothing negative like that, the Plus loan process is not looking at credit score. It's not looking at income to debt ratios, any of that stuff. So the Plus loan is one thing we encourage families to see if they qualify for as a possible alternative. Supplemental borrowing can be either the Plus or the private. If there's no eligibility in either of those programs, even with the Plus loan, if that's denied, the student can do some additional borrowing. It may not be enough, but it is some additional unsubsidized loan borrowing. But if those aren't options, then we want the student really to come talk to us about what their needs and situation is. There aren't many other ways I can point you towards. We talk about looking to see if circumstances warrant an emergency funding request. We talk about kind of thinking creatively if there's other places on campus that some resources can be identified, but there isn't another option that's easily pointed to if the Plus doesn't work, if the private doesn't work, and if there's still financial need. That really does have to be a conversation to see what the individual circumstances are and what possible options may be out there.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one more of the questions that were submitted, and there were several other questions. So want to encourage everyone who has a question that's really helping them figure out how they navigate after this semester to take the opportunity to reach out to the Office of Financial Aid using the contact information that has been shared. But in the meantime, the last question I'll ask while we are live has to do with residency. I had a couple submissions where folks are trying to understand whether or not financial aid processing and awarding plays a role in determining students' residency at the University of Michigan for tuition purposes.
Processes are completely separate, totally different. You don't want me to even try to guess on how the residency process works. I refer you to those people. What I will say, financial aid doesn't impact the residency application process or decision-making process, but residency impacts financial aid eligibility. I mean, if we look at the slide where in-state costs are just under 40,000, out-of-state costs are double that, more than double that, there's different levels of eligibility because the needs are so different. And so You will see if residency changes for a family, if they're initially classified out of state and then the student applies and is approved for in-state residency. After that process works itself out, after that determination is made, then financial aid gets notified and we update our financial aid offer, reassessing educational expenses, reassessing aid eligibility. But it works in the direction towards financial aid. It doesn't impact residency from financial aid, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. I think that's very clear. I hope that helps a couple of folks who were asking about that. I want to encourage families that have questions about work study to also reach out to financial aid, but also understand based on the questions I've seen that if your student's class schedule doesn't really jive well with the opening or vacancy that a department has, then the student may want to look for on-campus work and work study opportunities that align with their availability. They really would not be encouraged to take a position that overlaps with their class schedule. I think that's a policy violation. But I saw a couple questions about work study and schedule and alignment. So, and yes, students do need to be enrolled in the semester to accept a work study award. I don't mean to play financial aid, but I thought I could
Absolutely true
put
for
those
all
last
of
couple
those.
announcements out there. They do have to be enrolled in the semester to accept a work study award and then work in that capacity. So I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel, but I want to thank you, Chrissy, for allowing me to pose the questions for you tonight.
Thanks, Nicole.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining tonight. That's about all the time we have. I did put a note in the chat for everyone that if your question was not answered tonight, we will answer it. Our team will answer it within the next few days, and we will send an email with all of the questions and all of the answers, in addition to the slides and our link to our M Family YouTube channel where you can watch all of our recorded conversations. So as soon as we have a moment, we will answer all of the questions. We will send you an email with the slides and answers, and we will upload the recording of this session to our M Family YouTube channel. So please don't panic if your question wasn't answered. Of course, if you have anything urgent or would like to speak with someone in financial aid, I have put the contact information in the chat. You can call or email financial aid and get a hold of someone directly that way. We thank you for joining us tonight, and we hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you all. Take care.